Thank you all so much for coming tonight. Our goal is to reduce the victims of scams. We've seen an uptick in it in the last year or so. So you guys being here is a huge help and a huge move in that direction. We have two presenters tonight. First, we have Emily Burdett. She's with the Johnson County District Attorney's Office in their Consumer Fraud Division. And then Sergeant Pembleton will be presenting as well. He's our detective sergeant and handles a lot of our investigations. Turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Well, welcome. It is very nice to see you here, and welcome to everyone who is watching us on YouTube and Facebook. I am pleased to be here tonight to talk to you about the Kansas Consumer Protection Act and also some scams that we see in our office. So I just wanted to start a little bit, tell you about myself, a little bit about our office, what I do, and some of the resources that we have in the District Attorney's Office. So I have been a prosecutor in Steve Howe's District Attorney's Office for 13, almost 14 years now. The entirety of that time has been in the Consumer Fraud Division. Before that, I spent about 6 years at the Kansas Attorney General's Office, also doing consumer fraud. So I've made an entire legal career with no plans to change in consumer fraud. It is a very fascinating place to work. We get to work directly with the public, both in education, prevention, and then when something goes wrong, we're here to help and hopefully get people their money back and stop bad actors in our county. So in our office, we have a unit. We have specialized units within our office that do specific things. One of those is the Economic Crime Unit, and a subset within the Economic Crime Unit is our Consumer Protection Unit. And it is staffed full-time by 3 investigators. Those investigators are certified fraud examiners. So they are all very highly skilled in analyzing financial records, tracking where money goes in and out. We also have a few of them that are law enforcement certified. So they are highly skilled in this area. We have an intake coordinator who is amazing and is really the frontward-facing person in our consumer fraud unit. So she deals directly with folks who call our hotline, who have complaints, who walk into our lobby, and she handles all of sort of the frontline public communication. And then there's me. So our office has devoted the resources of a full-time prosecutor. It's kind of interesting because our office primarily handles criminal cases. And so I'm one of the few attorneys in our office that handles civil matters. So I appear in a whole different set of judges. From different judges. I have a whole different burden of proof. My job is very different from the other prosecutors in our office, and I enjoy that very much. So yeah, that's what our unit looks like, and we're all housed in the new courthouse down in Olathe Square, Johnson County Square. So a little bit about who our unit serves. We serve directly the citizens of Johnson County. The Kansas Attorney General's Office sort of covers the rest of the state regarding consumer protection. A couple of the large counties, Sedgwick County, Wyandotte County, a little bit of Douglas County, and Johnson County. We're large enough, we have enough retail activity, economic development in our counties that we have our own consumer protection units. So if you were in Shawnee County, if you were in Topeka, if you're in Paola, and something happens there, you would go to the Kansas Attorney General's Office. But for purposes of what happens in Johnson County, we handle it right here. We also serve non-citizens who come into Johnson County and make purchases. So that's actually a pretty large population of who our complainants are. A lot of folks like to come buy cars. They like to come buy couches. They like to shop within Johnson County. So we serve people who are not within our county as residents, but come into our county and make purchases. And then we give special attention to vulnerable consumers. And so those are consumers who might be targeted because they may have a difficult time protecting their own interests. They may be more susceptible to falling victim to a scam or consumer fraud because of they're just having a harder time protecting their own interest. And then we also have a special population called protected consumers, protected persons, and that includes elder adults, which is 60 years of age plus. I didn't write that statute, I promise. I always get looks at that. But what it does is it opens up some additional penalties. And so we can actually double our penalties if we can prove that someone has been targeted or taken advantage of because of their protected consumer status. So that is a Topeka issue, I promise. And then we also actually serve and represent legitimate businesses who are operating within our county and really staying within the boundaries of how businesses ought to be operating. We think it's important that the playing field is level and that those businesses who are, licensed and they're insured and they're getting their training and they're being really great, stewards of the money of their clients and their consumers. We really want to protect them and make sure that, positive economic development is happening here in Johnson County. So we have a great unit. What do we do? What do we enforce? And we enforce the Kansas Consumer Protection Act. And so the KCPA is what we call it. And that is a series of statutes that have been around in Kansas for a very long time. So they were first enacted in 1973. As we discussed, are enforced by the Attorney General's office and certain district attorney's offices throughout the state. And the KCPA essentially protects consumers who are engaged in consumer transactions. And we'll talk about what that means. Occurring in the state of Kansas, or for our purposes, occurring here within Johnson County. And it prohibits deceptive and unconscionable acts and practices, and we'll talk about what those are. And again, it's purely civil in nature. So while I have a lot of tools in my toolbox, I can't send anybody to jail. What we're looking for are remedies, injunctions, restitution, fines, and fees. So we're going to just kind of hit the wave tops of what the Consumer Protection Act is. And there's really three key definitions in it: consumer, supplier, and consumer transaction. So when we're talking about who the Consumer Protection Act covers, the first thing to look at is who is a consumer. You guys are all consumers. So it's really very simple. It sounds like what it is. It's just an individual or a family or a person who is acquiring property and services for their personal, family, household, business, or agricultural purposes here in the county. So that's pretty much everything you're going to buy. It can be buying, physical things. It can be buying a coat. It can be buying a car. It can also be services. It can be alarm services, cell phone services. Pest control services. We get a lot of those. Lawn and landscape services, grass services, those kinds of things. So that's kind of the bulk of what we see. We also see a lot of home improvement fraud. So that can be something if a consumer, for residential purposes, is hiring a contractor to come do work at their home, maybe remodeling a kitchen, maybe putting up a fence. There is a lot of construction work always happening in Johnson County. We've kind of hit a boom of people buying older houses and wanting to update those 90s houses. So we have a lot of contractors. Most of them do an amazing job, get their licensing, follow all the rules. But when something goes wrong in the course of a contractor transaction, then we would look to see, do we have a consumer? Is this a residential project? Next, we need to have a supplier. So a supplier is really a business, is an entity who in the ordinary course of business solicits or engages in consumer transactions. So this is just the other part of our transaction. So we have a consumer and they have to do business with someone and they're going to do business with a supplier. The supplier is going to be the person who's selling the item. The presumption in the Consumer Protection Act is that a supplier, a business, is the expert in the field that they're dealing in. So if I'm going to go buy a car, I'm going to buy a car at most maybe every couple of years, and at worst maybe every 10 or 15 years. I'm not an expert in buying a car, but the folks at the car dealership, they sell cars every day. They are experts in their field. They should possess a greater amount of knowledge in that industry or in that business or that area than a consumer would. And so we're looking at suppliers being held to a standard of making sure that they are being truthful with their consumers who are in a lesser position of bargaining. One of the keys here is in the ordinary course of business. So I call this the garage sale or the Facebook rule. So if you have someone who's just an individual who is selling their refrigerator on Facebook Marketplace, or they're selling a treadmill at their garage sale, then that's not going to really count as a supplier. Because in the ordinary course of business, their daily job is not selling refrigerators or selling treadmills. They're just doing kind of a one-off sale. So if that's the case, those are probably going to go to small claims court and not be under the Consumer Protection Act. And then our last prong is that we just have a meeting of the minds between those two parties. So we have our consumer and we have our supplier, and they're going to engage in a consumer transaction. They're going to come together and make a deal. So the key there is that there's some value given. So if, a business wants to come and give me a free service and I agree to that, and I don't give them any value for that, we're not going to have a consumer transaction. But as soon as I agree to pay for a service or to give some value for that service, then we have a consumer transaction. In most cases, there's going to be a written document, a contract, some kind of agreement, but there doesn't have to be. Could be a verbal or an oral agreement as well, as long as we have a consumer and a supplier and they've come together. Another key part of this is that a solicitation by a supplier can be enough to constitute a transaction under the Consumer Protection Act. So that's kind of contrary to what I just said, right? Because we have to give value. But what the Consumer Protection Act also contemplates is that we want to make sure our advertising is fair and truthful, and that consumers can count on that advertising doing what it says it does. So, I've had numerous cases where I haven't ever had to prove that I had a harmed consumer if I can just on the face of the solicitation, the flyer that's being sent, or the ad that's playing on the radio or the TV is saying something that's not true. Okay, so that's what the KCPA is. Sometimes it's just as helpful to know what something isn't when you're trying to figure it out. So a few things of what the KCPA is not. So it's not fraud. It sounds a lot like fraud, but it's a little different from fraud. There's a lower standard of proof for us. So that's one of the things that is very different about what I do in our office. Usually in our office, folks are trying to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a very high burden for a very good reason. Generally, I'm looking at a preponderance of the evidence, which just means more likely than not. So our burdens of proof are lower, different pleading requirements. The state can bring these, and we do have a longer statute of limitations. And in fact, if it's a Consumer Protection Act claim that is brought by the state, we actually don't have a statute of limitations, which is amazing. So there is a private cause of action in the KCPA, and those are going to usually be 3 to 5 years. It's going to depend a little bit, but there will be a statute of limitations. If our office or the Attorney General's office is bringing a case, we don't have a statute of limitations, which is amazing because then we can do a look back. So we get around 500 complaints a year. I'll talk about that. And we get around 1,500 or more phone calls a year. And we track all that. So if we have a supplier who becomes a problem in 2024, I can go back and see if we would have had a pattern over the years, and I can pull in consumers and try to get them restitution, even if their complaint happened in 2018. The KCPA is also not buyer's remorse. So there's sort of a general presumption that if you buy something and you don't want it, you have a right to take it back. In Kansas, that's really not true. There's a few exceptions if it's a door-to-door sale, for instance, or if a store has a policy. But otherwise, there's not really an inherent right if you purchase something to take it back. It's not for shoddy workmanship. If we've got, generally that's a contractor case where we have some work that is done and it's done very poorly, but the work is still done, but the quality is not good. Generally, those are going to be outside of our scope. Business-to-business transactions are not going to be in our scope, and purchase of goods for resale. Okay, so these are kind of our bread and butter violations. So we've talked about what it is and who it serves, but what actually would a violation of the Consumer Protection Act look like? It is a lot of statutes, but the two that we most commonly use are deceptive acts and practices and unconscionable acts and practices. And so for deceptive act or practice, we're looking for something in the inducement of a transaction that was false or omitted or exaggerated. Regarding a material fact, so something that is going to cause our consumer to choose to purchase what they're going to purchase or to do business with a certain business. So if I have a supplier who indicates that they are licensed and they advertise that they're licensed and their contract says that they're licensed, and later our consumer finds out actually they weren't licensed, that was a misrepresentation of a material fact. It alluded that they had a status or affiliation that they don't have. And it is likely that a consumer could have chosen to enter that transaction based on the material fact that their contractor was licensed, or their realtor was licensed, or their esthetician was licensed, or their barber was licensed. So that's kind of what we're looking for there. Bait and switch is one we see as well, where we're offering one product and giving another product. I had a case years ago where a certain kind of gutter guard was offered and a second kind was put on of a lesser value. We become experts in very interesting little niches based on our cases. But bait and switch basically means you're promised something and then something lesser is delivered. And then unconscionable acts and practices don't always have to happen at the beginning of a transaction. Those can happen sort of over the course of a transaction. And it's kind of hard to define, except that we say it's, when you hear about it, you know it's very wrong. It will shock your conscience. It's the cases you hear about where you just really feel like someone's been taken advantage of, where we have a homeowner who maybe will have a transient out-of-town tree trimming company come in, and suddenly they've charged them $40,000 to cut down a perfectly good tree. Right, so that's kind of hard to put a label on, except when you hear it, you know it's wrong. You know, it sort of makes you perk up and go, that's not right. That's shocking to the conscience. And this is really where we're looking at consumers being taken advantage of. That may mean that they were offered a contract in a language other than their native language. It may mean that they were paying money for something at a grossly excessive rate, that they were paying 3 or 4 times more for a product or a service than they should have. Again, this will arise. An example was, putting on a deck at a house, and the cost would skyrocket, be 4, 5, 6 times more than what would normally be charged, because we have an elderly widow who has been sort of groomed and taken along by our contractors and convinced that that's an appropriate amount to pay. So really sort of taking advantage of that person. And then the last thing we look at is if the consumer gave their value and they didn't get any benefit. So this would be paying for something and then never getting delivery of it, right? So I could order gosh, we've had so many. I could order siding for my house, and I have paid for it and I have a contract, and then I just get ghosted and they don't come deliver it. So those are kind of the 2 main provisions. And I love to share this with everyone, because hopefully as you're hearing these things, we're kind of thinking through situations that you've encountered or that neighbors have told you about, or you can kind of see how these things could happen within our community. What we are really looking for in our office are patterns or practices of this behavior. So if we have a supplier who is repeatedly engaging in these violative acts, then we want to act on behalf of the county and shut that business down or remedy that and get people their money back, because obviously we want to make sure that the citizens in Johnson County are being able to conduct fair and honest business. So when we do find a violation, again, our 3 investigators, they will investigate those. They will do interviews, financial record analysis. We're able to send subpoenas. So we can do that before filing a case, so we can get bank records and those things up front. And then we file a litigation or enter into agreements where we always are looking for restitution to get money back to our victims to make them whole. And then the other thing we really seek are injunctive orders. So again, that's either shutting the business down completely. And generally when we do that, we also seek to prohibit that business or that individual who owns the business from operating any other kind of business dealing with consumers within our county. So if it's a tree trimmer and they agree to a prohibition or we can get it ordered, we're ordering them that they're not allowed to act as a supplier in our county, regardless of what business they're doing. So we're sort of saying, that's it, you had your chance, it didn't go well. And then we can get civil penalties. So this is just a little bit of how to reach us. If you ever feel like you have questions or you're seeing something that might be a violation of the Consumer Protection Act, we take walk-ins. We have a consumer fraud hotline that is staffed during business hours, and you can get a complaint form or talk to an investigator or intake specialist with questions. We also love referrals from partner agencies. We try to get out and talk to law enforcement within the county and let them know that we're a resource. And then we do take consumer complaint forms. That kind of looks like that. So that's available on our website. And like I said, we get around 500 or so of those a year. They're not all cases that we take action on. Some of those we mediate, some we refer to other agencies. But we try to be really proactive and also very responsive to the community. All right, so that's my Consumer Protection Act talk, and letting you know sort of who we are and what we do. And offering our office as a resource to you all, and hopefully you will share that information with others in the community. Yeah, do you have a question?
Yeah, just quickly.
Sure.
I am aware of something that happened in my old HOA.
Uh-huh.
I was part of the board, and then I moved, and I know this has been like 5 or 6 years ago, and I don't know that they ever did anything about it. Is that something they could, at this point in time, this many years later, go back and fill out that consumer complaint form? It was a landscaping business at the time that we had the issues, but the work never got done. I don't know what happened with it, but
Yeah, that's exactly what
I
it
would
was
tell
for.
them if that's an option if they never got.
Yeah, We'd be looking at no material benefit on it. The only thing we would have to look at on HOAs is a lot of those are incorporated. And if the HOA is an incorporated entity, then they're going to not fall within what a consumer could be. But that's definitely something that we could sort out. We also would like to know who that supplier is
So that's,
and to see if we have a pattern of that person. It's, everything's happen. We have business, things happen. People get sick. We have a lot of amazing small business owners in our county. And when something catastrophic happens in their life, things happen. But the other part of that is true is that when we get one complaint, it is often likely that we are going to get more and more. So I would say there would be no harm in it. And we can talk about that. I can definitely get you a form. So this next part, I want to talk about scams because I know you're here to learn about scams. And we're going to specifically sort of talk about scams that are targeting our elderly population. I borrowed this part of the PowerPoint from one of our investigators, Tiva Lewis. She created this and does a lot of our speaking events. So I'm going to share the information she has here. Stop me at any point if you have questions or anything specific we want to talk about. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about why our elderly population is a little more vulnerable to scams. And one of those is just because they account for most of the wealth in the country. That is where a lot of the money that is sitting in trusts or CDs or savings accounts is going to be. So obviously, if we're trying to separate people from their money, we're going to go to where the money is. And then some of our elderly individuals, more than the general population, might live alone. They may have fewer relatives or friends nearby than others. They maybe also would be a little less social. And they maybe also are not as, they may get their news and things through very more traditional routes, through newspapers or through watching the news. And they may not hear as much information about things that are circulating on social media and that. We also have a large population who reside in nursing homes or assisted living facilities. And then unfortunately, our elderly population is more likely to suffer from a mental condition that might impair their ability to make sound financial decisions or might make them more susceptible to fall for a scam. And then, of course, we have loneliness and generational differences that may make them more of a target. So this list could go on and on for days. I'm sure you all have types of scams in your head. These are just some of the most common we see. Obviously, romance scams, and those are going to often originate over the phone or over the internet, often with folks who don't actually exist on the other side, but are very good at luring people in, pretending to be others, and eventually separating folks from their money. Instant winner and prizes, charities. So there are a lot of amazing charities, but there are a lot of charities that are entities that may purport to be a charity that are not, in fact, legitimate charities. There are recent sources, kscharitycheck.org. I think that's right, where you can go and search and see what charities are legitimate. We have home improvement scams, the grandparent scam. Everyone's heard of the grandparent scam. You would think that that has circulated so much that everyone would know about it and wouldn't still be happening. Unfortunately, it is continuing to happen. And of course, that's when someone will get a phone call and on the other side is a scam artist purporting to be a grandson, a granddaughter, a niece, a nephew. It's always generally someone younger who is in trouble. Don't tell mom, don't tell dad. This is the problem I have and I need you to wire me money immediately. IRS scams, emails or spam texts, phishing emails that indicate you owe money to the IRS, and there's some looming deadline. If you don't pay it, bad things are going to happen. Computer viruses. We have seen scams where companies, will call or text or email and say, we've detected a very dangerous malware on your computer, and for money, we will help you. And then what they will actually do is come and sort of take over your computer. They can get access to, come and remotely access your computer and can get and see all of your information in your files. So those are really kind of scary ones because a lot of us keep a whole lot of sensitive information on your computers. And then cell phones have just sort of, opened up a whole host of scams. I think we all get the texts that say UPS is trying to deliver us a package that doesn't exist. Or they're going to confirm an appointment that we never made, or they're making sure that we're confirming the last four of our bank account because we're wiring money. I mean, I think we all get those texts, and we just make sure that we delete them. Same thing for emails. Hopefully everyone's got some sort of an email blocker set up or something that's going to filter out some of the scam or some of the junk. One of the things that we've been saying for years is that legitimate companies aren't going to contact you over text, aren't going to contact you over email if something's really wrong. Usually they're going to contact you in a way that you've agreed to communicate with them. Usually it's going to be by letter. Doesn't mean letters can't be fraudulent. But the most important thing is when you are getting information that looks like it might be from a business that you do business with. I got one last week that said my PayPal account had been hacked. And there had been unauthorized use, and here was this invoice that it sent to me. Well, I use PayPal all the time. And it looked very real. And, even I did. I looked at it and I thought, oh my gosh, what have I done? Well, when you go and you look at the address it's coming from, it's, PayPal 124 dot blah, blah, blah. It's not really, they're spoofing that. So I followed my own advice, and I went out to PayPal, logged into my account, went and looked at my recent activity, and of course, everything was fine. So anytime it looks like someone that you actually do business with is trying to contact you, you want to contact them independently. Even if it's a little offensive, if you're like, oh, I don't want to offend my hairstylist or whatever, they want to make sure that you are a repeat happy customer. So if it looks like your bank is contacting you, your lawn service, anything like that, just go to a number that you know is legitimate for them and just contact them and see if it's true. I got a text from my dentist office yesterday, said I owed money. And I said, I'm going to call you and we'll talk about this. So even when it's legitimate, I owed the $14. Even when it's legitimate, it's just a safer way to do it than starting to engage in the texting conversation. So some common tactics we see that scammers are using, really the number one that we always see is creating some sense of panic, some sense of urgency, and just, catastrophic, bad things are going to happen if we don't act immediately. That's why the grandparent scam is so successful, because it is always somebody who has to make bail in Mexico or has to get their car out of the tow lot so they can get to their final, or something that is very time sensitive, or your power is going to be shut off if you don't go get a Blue Dot card and send it to me. So they're creating this panic and this sense of urgency that doesn't exist. And when we get panicked and when we feel anxiety, our brain is not going to function the same way it would. The other thing it does is it sort of isolates us. If we're in a position where we're having to act very quickly, we're not going to talk about that as much as we might with someone else. If I had 5 days to make a decision, think of all the people I would talk to about that decision versus if I have 5 minutes to make that decision. Usually I'm just going to make that based on what's happening in my head or what somebody is feeding me. Making promises that sound too good to be true. If it sounds too good to be true, it is. It just frankly is. And if you really, really believe it, go confirm it independently. And unfortunately, it's generally not as good as it sounds to be. Folks who are overly friendly, overly talkative, trying to pull information out of you. And unfortunately, we've seen this happen at senior centers. We've seen this happen at churches. Folks who are finding out personal information about you, they may not ultimately be the scammer. They may be passing that information on to somebody else. So now they can call and say, hey, I know that you have a grandson at Michigan State, and I know your grandson's mom's name is Jill. And now I've collected these little pieces of data and these little pieces of information that I can hand off to my partner, who can now create a sense of urgency in your life because they're giving you information that's actually true. Convincing you that they're there for you, that they are really invested in you and your best interests, and that they are going to try to usurp a lot of your time and make themselves an important person in your life. And convincing the victim that they are so generous and that they are just unlike anyone they've ever met. This is a place where we see a lot of false charities coming. If we discover that a potential victim has a really soft spot for animals, then that scammer may play on that. They're really good at this. It's how they make their living. So they may say, you are just so compassionate about animals and it's so important we have more people like you. And they build this really sense of importance about the person that's going to make them more likely to donate. And then choosing their targets, age is something that scammers look for. Folks who are talkative, who are likely to share information, maybe are friendly, unfortunately. Also, they're going to look for folks with cognitive issues. I had a case a long time ago where a woman was being sold commemorative coins over the phone, back when we still bought things over the phone. And it turned out that these salesmen discovered that she had some cognitive issues and she couldn't remember conversations she had had earlier in the day, to the tune of $90-some thousand worth of coins that her children found in the top of her closet. And we were able to get the recordings, the verification calls, and we had on tape the sales folks having the same conversations with our victim and selling her the same items as though they were new to her within the period of the same day. I mean, it was really sad and tragic. Vulnerabilities, obituaries, finding out when someone has had a recent loss in their life, especially if it's been a tragic loss, they may be more susceptible. And then actually looking for people who appear to be financially sound, who are maybe at church, at the grocery store, at the senior center, visiting the nursing home, who drive a nicer car, who dress nicer, who are going to be a potentially more lucrative target for them. And then unfortunately, looking at folks who appear to be lonely, who do want to talk, who do need a friend, who are willing to trust someone in a position that someone who isn't suffering from that same loneliness might not. Okay, so how do we protect ourselves? There's a lot of things you can do. Being here is great. Being savvy is great. Making sure that you have people in your life that you can trust. Having one or two people that you can trust and you can be that same person for them. And so when something seems off, that person is going to be your sounding board. And you can call them and say, does this sound weird to you? Because it sounds kind of weird to me. Always be suspicious. We kind of hate to live our lives like that, but it's really a way to protect ourselves. Hear what people are saying, take it with a grain of salt, do your own research, do your own homework, go research the charity, go make sure the GoFundMe is existing for what the purpose is. Make sure that the address is correct. Never make any decisions under pressure. Again, the minute you tell yourself you're not going to make a decision under pressure, you're going to really shut down a lot of the scams. It's sort of like in our house, we have a rule that we're never buying anything that anybody ever sells at our front door. It doesn't matter. If it's a Girl Scout, we will buy the cookies. Otherwise, we won't. And so when you sort of make some of those decisions for yourself, then you set your own boundary. And so setting some boundaries about, I'm never going to wire money. We're just never going to wire money. It's not a thing we're going to do. I'm never going to send a prepaid card to anyone. I'm never going to open an account unless I've talked to my trusted person. Just setting some of those own boundaries in your life or setting them with people who you are helping care for. Again, calling a trusted person, call our consumer hotline, call your local police department, and discuss what's happening. One, that lets us know what's going on in the community. And two, it's a really easy way to diffuse the situation. Don't pay money up front if you can help it. If you do pay money up front, make sure you're in a sound contract. It's for something you've really thought through, and it's in a reasonable deposit. There are a few times where you have to completely pay for something before you have received delivery of it. Cash payment apps can be tricky. Cash App, Venmo, Zelle. A lot of us do use Venmo, but it's an easy way to have people send you requests for money. It's an easy way to wire money to the wrong person. Those are just, it could be a boundary that you just set, that's just not a way that I'm going to operate. I'm going to always have some cash on me if I need to, pay for something. There are places where Venmo is valuable, but that's a boundary you can decide. Stop writing checks to people you don't know. Unfortunately, checks are still getting stolen and still getting washed. We think that how many checks do we write anymore in a month, but it doesn't mean that scam has stopped. And actually the technology has continued to develop, but checks are still getting washed and still getting presented. Check your mail, right? So if you have a mailbox, most of us have boxes now. If you're someone who still has the mailbox at the end of their drive and you put the flag up when mail is in there, you have just alerted everyone that you have outgoing mail in your mailbox, and there's a potential that there's a check in there. So if it's a birthday card, maybe fine, but if it's something with cash or money in it, you might just want to drop it in a box. Read the fine print. So we see a lot of contracts that folks are in with details that they didn't realize were there. Auto renewals. is one of the biggest one we see, particularly in alarm companies, pest services, landscaping companies. The contract may auto-renew for 3 years. You may think that, you had an introductory rate and then it's going to kick up and, come in at a higher rate. Cell phone contracts, read all the contracts. You have time. Don't feel pressured to sign a contract you're not ready to sign. One of the big trends that we are seeing is contracts on tablets. So where we used to get paper and a duplicate and we're signing and we have a chance to kind of take something and read it. We have companies who are presenting their contracts for signature on like an iPad, particularly door to door. So you're maybe signing up for alarm service and you're going to be handed a tablet and told to sign. And then the minute you sign, it's going to jump down to the next place your signature needs to be, or it's going to populate all the signature blocks with your signature. And then you may or may not get emailed a copy of that. Once the contract has been signed, it's really hard to get out of. So if you are trying to buy something and someone's presenting you a tablet or a computer contract, ask them to print it out. So please print this out. I'd really like to review it first. And if they won't, it might not be somebody you want to do business with, or they should give you time to sit and read it completely. And once you're in it, it's really hard to get out. So don't assume you can cancel later, and then really just trust your instincts. If it, feels like something is wrong, slow down, take a big deep breath. Okay, so that's scams. And then I just wanted to very, very briefly touch on financial exploitation and mistreatment of dependent adults. This is an area where our economic crimes unit folks are experts, but it's just worth mentioning that this is more of an area, scams can still be within this, but it's sort of those cases that we hear about where a caregiver or a family member is sort of taking prolonged advantage of someone. And oftentimes it's an elderly person. It's usually someone who's close to them or has become, we call it a new best friend. Someone who has suddenly come into someone's life and really kind of hedged their way in. They may end up living with them. They may end up moving their family in with them. And oftentimes that person will suddenly start to control a lot of the financial decision-making that has happened. These are very devastating cases when we see them, and they are oftentimes an amazing amount of financial loss. So it's essentially trying to use another person's financial resources without their consent. Writing checks to themselves, buying themselves presents, gifts that the person would not normally make, taking them into banks and having them open new bank accounts and putting this person who's exploiting them on those bank accounts. There are a lot of examples. It's usually financial activity where the victim starts to be isolated, and it can be really difficult for families. Sometimes it can include physical abuse. And I just mention it here because we hear these stories within our community and with people that we care about and love. And if you do start to notice some of those things, it's very important to just go ahead and reach out to law enforcement, let them know what's happening, and try to figure out if there is potentially a violation of one of these criminal statutes that need to be investigated. All right, and then finally, just a few closing tips. Remember, if it's too good to be true, it is. It's your money, protect it. It's your identity, protect it. Your identity is as good as money. One of the things that we're seeing more and more of is data breaches. And so little bits of information are being taken over time. And eventually that information can be sold together, packaged together, and identities are very valuable. So a thing that is always important to do is to be checking your credit reports. If you check your credit reports, you'll indicate, those will indicate if anyone's trying to open a line of credit, trying to buy things. It is important to check credit reports of grandchildren. I check my children's credit reports. They have pristine credit. They're not checking their credit reports. And they have social security numbers. So as soon as you have a social security number, you're out there available to be an identity theft victim. And normally they may not have any activity on their credit until they're 18 or older. So check your free credit reports. FTC.gov is an amazing resource for that. You can check credit reports for free. And they'll have all the correct links to follow there. You can also lock down your credit reports. You can put freezes on them or alerts on them. So if anyone's trying to open lines of credit in your name, you can get notified of that, or they'll just outright block it. And then just remember, you're always in control of the situation. So again, the scammers are going to prey on creating a false sense of urgency. but you are in control. You can always say no, you can always walk away, you can always go talk to somebody else, you can call law enforcement, you remain in control. The thing that they most want you to feel is out of control, because when we're out of control, we're not going to make the same decisions that we would make if we were in control. And just that we are here to help. So this is our consumer hotline number, and that is our website. Our complaint forms and some other information are available there. So thanks for your attention. Any questions before I turn it over? Yes, sir.
So, do other counties in Kansas, in the north side, have similar officers in the counties that you find?
Great question. Yeah, absolutely. So Kansas is under the Kansas Consumer Protection Act, but all states have their own kind of version of this act. So the Missouri Attorney General's office is one of the partner agencies we would work with. I'm not sure if any of their counties, I would assume some of their bigger counties may have individual offices, but the Missouri Attorney General's office, the Nebraska Attorney General's office, Colorado, all of those states are going to have those. And then here in Kansas, it's Johnson County, Wyandotte County, and Sedgwick County. We have our own, and then otherwise it goes to Topeka. We have an arrangement with Topeka too. If they get a complaint that's in our jurisdiction, then they send it to us.
Am I understand correctly that your only recourse in a bad actor is to go for civil penalty? There's never criminal prosecution of anybody for failure?
That's a good question. So not under the Consumer Protection Act, but that doesn't mean that there are other available remedies. So what will happen oftentimes is that I will have we'll kind of run parallel to each other. So I will have a civil investigation, and we kind of have different rules about how we get information against a bad actor, and at the same time, they may be being prosecuted for theft. I had we've seen a lot of pool cases during COVID. Everyone wanted a backyard pool. The money was good, and businesses took money up front. And then we had a lot of folks in Johnson County with holes in their backyard and a lot of money those are expensive, a lot of money that they're out and no completed pool. And so, one of the things that can happen is we can have a parallel investigation where we are, trying to prohibit the business, look at restitution that way, but we may also have a companion theft by deception case or theft case that's going. Same as in those mistreatment cases. We are so unterritorial, if it could go criminal, we are 100% for that because the remedies are just stronger. And sometimes we can work together and still get the business prohibited. So, yeah.
So if you have a roofing company or some other type of, where there's cousins on it, is it possible somebody just close down one LLC and open up another one and, essentially be doing the same business in the same jurisdiction?
Yeah.
Or can you find a way to prevent that?
Yeah, it's a great question. The hope is that we completely prohibit the owner. So every opportunity we have, we call it piercing the corporate veil. And so even if it's an incorporated entity, if we can prove to the court that the owner or owners of that business were using that business to commit these bad acts for their own personal use, there's kind of a schematic we go through, then we will name the individual. So I would say probably 90% of the cases I file or that I settle, not only is the business prohibited, so basically we effectively shut down the business, but we prohibit the owner of that business from acting as a supplier, or we put guardrails in place. So if they have a new business, these are the things they have to do to comply.
So in doing that, we have to prevent them from not only, for example, the roofing company, that they could also not open up some other type of home improvement,
And nor could they mow lawns, and nor could they sell cars, and nor could they run a dry cleaners. Now they could remain in the roofing entity and do commercial roofing, but they couldn't do residential anymore. So we kind of have a presumption that if a business wants to do business with another business, they're a more equal footing and they can kind of afford legal counsel and that kind of thing. So they could still work with other businesses, but no, that is our goal. And I'm glad you mentioned that. On our website, we have a list. We call it prohibited and restricted businesses. So when we enter into an agreement with an individual and or company and they are prohibited from acting within Johnson County, you can go on our website and you can see their name and you can see their case number. And even if they are just restricted, so maybe we say you can't be a roofer anymore, or you can't sell real estate anymore, but you can do other things, that is going to be on our website as well. It's a great resource.
So I was always under the impression before I knew you existed, my only remedy would be to hire an attorney or take small claims depending on what their dollar amount is. So with this knowledge that I'm picking up tonight, would that preclude me from needing to do that, or would that put you two parallel things?
Kind of depends on the case. So what will happen oftentimes is we sort of have a very narrow window of what we can do, particularly regarding damages. So the restitution I can get for a person is usually their out-of-pocket loss. Now, if the roof was so bad that it rained into their house and ruined their grand piano, I can't get them the value of their grand piano, but that doesn't mean there isn't still a claim for the value of that grand piano. So in our cases, particularly in our settlement language, we put explicitly, nothing in this settlement precludes the consumer from bringing their own causes of action. Now, you can't double recover, but for all those other things that I couldn't bring, you could still bring. Generally, if something has gone to small claims court or it's in litigation, then we don't insert ourselves, we don't intervene into that litigation. What we have done in some cases where we have multiple consumer victims is if we have maybe 5 of those victims have gone to small claims court and have already obtained a judgment, we won't seek money for them, but we will still include them in our case to demonstrate the pattern of bad acts. So yeah, so that's one of the things that we kind of grind up against. So we don't really have a time frame, and we operate with 500 complaints and 1 attorney. So obviously we try to be as efficient as we can. But sometimes what we always want to make sure is that while an individual is working with our office, they're not letting their small claims court window run, because we can't hold those statute limitations off. So the thing we are all, it is programmed in us to always say to, please consult a private attorney. Please make sure all of your remedies are available to you, because we may be gathering a case with 20 victims, and that takes more time than to proceed. But it doesn't necessarily preclude recovery in our case. The money part is where we have to kind of make sure the recovery is going, but to show the bad act can still come to us. So we work with a lot of attorneys. We will talk to them. Where is your case at? Where's our case at? We can't share a ton of information, but we can track along together. Thanks for your question. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Sergeant Pembleton.
Good evening. My name is Todd Pembleton. I'm a detective sergeant here at the Gardner Police Department. I've been, I've been doing this for quite a while. Since 1994 is when I became a full-time police officer. And during the course of my career, I've been a certified fraud examiner. I've worked full-time white-collar investigations. I was doing it. I laughed when she was talking about checks because we hardly see them anymore. But when I first started working fraud cases, that's where I cut my teeth, working forgeries, counterfeit checks. And then we had this big phenomena come on called identity theft, where people would actually go in person and open accounts and things like that. So I've kind of seen the evolution to where we're at today. So I think in total I've spent between 15 to 17 years in investigations during the course of my career. And that's included private. I was in the private sector for about 3 years doing corporate investigations, and the rest has been criminal. So here at the Gardner Police Department, the way we're set up, I'm the detective sergeant. I have 3 detectives that report to me. We investigate all crimes that need follow-up investigation in the city of Gardner. I have 1 detective who tries to focus on drugs and narcotics. I have 1 who tries, he is focused on family crimes and sex crimes. And then I have a general assignment detective who gets the bulk of all the other investigations that come in. That's not to say that at any time, 1 won't be working any type of other case. It's just we're a small unit, so we all kind of pitch in and help where we can. Here in Gardner, we see a lot of the scams that ADA Burdett had listed up there. I won't go back over and repeat. One of the most frequent fraudulent scam that we see is identity theft. And that's not just targeted at elderly citizens. That runs the gamut. We have identity theft all the way from teenagers up through the elderly. So that's hit or miss. There's so many different ways that these thieves can get compromised identities. So it's hard to say where it comes from. But, increasingly what we find is that probably 90% of the cases, the stolen identity is our resident, but the identity's been used in another location throughout the country to open a bank account, to open some kind of credit account, or some kind of way to get financial gain. It's very rare that we have, kind of a local case where we have the suspect and victim and everything just right here. So it takes a lot of work if we have a good identity theft case where we think we have a good suspect that's located here in the United States, because we do have a lot of our suspects that are located outside the United States. But if we have somebody within the United States that's a good suspect, those cases can take months and months and months to work, just because, we have to serve subpoenas to track computers and IP addresses and accounts. And so, citizens get frustrated with it because they want resolution. My golly, my identity was stolen. I want something done now. And we love to help, but it does take time. So that's one of the frustrating parts on our end. It's not, like a bar fight where police show up, somebody hits somebody, we can arrest them and go home and on to the next. So it does take time. Probably with the elderly being targeted in our community, most common scams that we see are the sweetheart scams, the lonely heart scams, where somehow through Facebook, some social media site, they've befriended somebody on the other end who they think is whoever they purport to be, and it's really just a scammer or a series of people who are using that Facebook login to scam this person, and they talk them into, it's just a little bit of money at first, and then they just keep building on it. We've seen here in the last, I think, year, several incidences where people are receiving calls purporting to be law enforcement officers, specifically Johnson County deputies, saying you owe bail money, you owe this, that, or the other, trying to use that office name to add some credibility. And inevitably, most of the time we catch those prior to someone actually being scammed, because I think people are catching on that those are scams, and they will call us with just, hey, are you guys calling us? And then you'll see the alert that goes out on social media. There's a scam taking place. The IRS one was a big one for a while. My own mother-in-law, before she passed, she called me nonstop, knowing what I do for a living. These people had her scared. One of the common things we see is that once a person's targeted once and they have given up information of any type, they get on a list, and these lists are traded on the internet, the dark web, where people will go buy a list of victims, basically, and it's just a numbers game. They call and they target these victims repeatedly. Well, she got targeted, and the IRS one's the one that really got her every time. And I remember I was driving I was with another detective, and she called me just almost in tears, thinking, I'm about ready to get arrested. The IRS is going to show up. They said I owe back taxes. And I'm like, I don't have time to talk about this. I've told you, let them arrest you. Tell them to show up and arrest you. I will come post your bond. I said, they are not going to arrest you. I promise. And it was just everything in her wanted to comply, because that's what she was used to. And, these people just prey on that. So, probably one of the most common things right now that we're seeing, where we're hitting some really substantial losses, is the computer scams, or they will target somebody with something. The last one, a person allowed them to take control of their home computer under the pretext, we're from Microsoft, your computer's been targeted. So once they do, then they put some things on the computer that make it appear there's pornography on it. And then they scare them, hey, you need to go pay this amount of money to get this taken off, or they're going to drain your bank accounts. They give them some kind of story. But their whole goal is to get them, primarily right now, to go get Bitcoin. We have several Bitcoin ATMs in our community, and they talk them into taking cash out and putting cash into the Bitcoin machine and transferring it to a wallet somewhere out in cyberspace. Once that happens, it is extremely difficult for us to recover that money. We've been successful in one case because we basically interrupted it right after she put $13,000 into this Bitcoin ATM. Another couple, we were fortunate enough, a former officer saw them with a bag of money at the ATM and called one of our current detectives who was off duty and happened to be close by, went to the business and said, stop, don't put money in there, what's going on? They were about ready to put $36,000 into this Bitcoin ATM to prevent whatever fraud these fraudsters had told them at this point. So, my general, we went and spoke with business owners. The business owners don't actually own these Bitcoin ATMs. They lease a space basically for the owners to put the ATMs in, and then they generate all the business and profits. So when we were going around trying to do some fraud education to these businesses, it was a story at every single one of them. We don't see a lot of people using these Bitcoin ATMs except elderly people. They always bring cash in. And, so we were trying to get them on board with giving us a call. When you see this, please call us. We will send an officer to talk through, if it's a legit transaction, they want to use a Bitcoin ATM, more power to them. We don't want to prevent commerce, but we want to prevent victims from getting defrauded over these scams. So anything Bitcoin related where somebody's encouraging you or a relative, family member to go to a Bitcoin ATM and deposit money, seriously take a pause. I'd suggest contacting your local law enforcement and let us help you look into it, because there is just no valid reason with the fees that these Bitcoin ATMs charge that a normal person would utilize them. For example, on the transaction with the $13,000 that our victim put in to the Bitcoin ATM, of that $13,000, it was between $3,000 and $4,000 were in fees, the Bitcoin ATM fees. That is egregious. I mean, that's crazy. So, I'm not against cryptocurrency. I played with it, but you can do it with apps on your phone, and there's a couple dollar transaction for doing things. That's a very reasonable thing that somebody would do if they're being reasonable and not defrauding. So I see no legitimate purpose. We're trying to work with our command staff here and our city council to maybe try to get some ordinances regulating the amount of deposited per day per person on these Bitcoin ATMs. So if they insist on being the victim of a fraud, hopefully we can limit their exposure to it. The other thing I caution, no business anywhere will take, no legitimate business anywhere will ask you to pay an iTunes cards. It sounds funny, but we haven't had a lot here lately since the shift to Bitcoin. But prior to the Bitcoin ATMs, iTunes cards were the preferred method. They will have their victims go to Walmart, buy $1,000, $5,000 in iTunes cards, then immediately call them with the numbers or take pictures and send them numbers. And as soon as they do that, that money's gone. So, those are the biggest one that's hit our area lately. It took place kind of here in Gardner, but it was with the sheriff's department and they're working it too. Anybody that tries to convert or that tries to have your relative convert their savings to gold bars or any gold or convert any kind of savings, they should really be questioning that. There was a part of a national ring that was going across the United States, and one of them was caught here in Kansas City. They converted over $1 million into gold bars from one victim. Luckily, they were able to intercept those. But we had a local victim that lost several $100,000 in gold bars. And it took the detective hours and separate visits with our victim to where the victim was finally comfortable enough to say, yeah, I'm a victim. That's a loss. I was scammed. Because they didn't want to believe it. That's their life savings. And these people, prey on that and threaten them. Don't tell anybody. You'll never get your money back. And so that's kind of, that's what the primary crimes that we see. We don't have a lot of complaints of the consumer, fraudulent business practices or things like that. And knock on wood, we haven't had a lot of the travelers cases where we have after storms where you have traveling roofing companies and driveways repair scams and things like that. We've been very fortunate to not have those out here. So, I like that people feel good to call us. We do get a lot of calls of people saying, hey, I'm curious about this, but yet we still have a lot of victims out there. So just please, especially your elderly parents, relatives, friends, encourage them to call us. We're never so busy that we can't take time. A patrol officer would rather come over and talk to them and figure out, hey, this is not really legit, than to have to take a theft report where the person's out thousands of dollars. So that's pretty much all I got to add. She was very good at covering everything I could have talked to you about. Do you guys have any questions of local law enforcement? Sure.
I have one that didn't have any person, but it's a friend of ours. Their property, their title to the property was stolen. And is there anything you can do to prevent that in advance? You have the consumer credits to check. I check on our names to make sure that our house is in our name and stuff, but I had no clue how that ever happened. How someone else stole.
So was it
the title to the home?
they were able to transfer the entire title without them ever
Yes.
knowing? I don't know. I'd have to dig in on that one.
Well,
That's probably something you guys would see more than us, but
but I was just thinking maybe, talk about the credit, check your credit. I thought, the only thing I could think is check on names to make sure that the house is in our name, but I don't know.
yeah, that's a great resource. And what she's talking about, if you just Google search Johnson County Ames, it's automated information mapping system, I think is what it stands for. You can go on and click on that and it'll give you like a Google Maps view, and then you can identify property, and then when you do that, it'll tell you who owns it.
Your address, your
Right.
last name,
Yeah, it's
They
been,
don't live here in Kansas, but that's why I was just wondering.
Right.
If there's something in place here.
no, I get notified like 5 different ways every time that I bought a house that, hey,
Well,
we're
that's
selling
what
this.
all of you-
Yeah, that's amazing to me
Only
that,
I was thinking maybe some elderly, they were middle-aged couple.
Right.
But,
yeah, I know there's been several issues with liens placed on properties but now they've enacted some statutes that make that illegal, and it's much more difficult for people to put fake liens on properties. But that's a new one to me. I haven't heard that one in my career. Yes. Yeah. That brings up
stories around the country, not necessarily around here, where squatters come in while you're on vacation and allow while people, sort on that. Is there any of that in Johnson County or in Gardner?
None in Gardner. Johnson County, I'm not really aware of any. We have some if somebody goes on vacation and
somebody has came in and taken up squatters. I mean, they come home and say to leave, we go tell them to leave, and if they don't, we arrest them for trespassing. I mean, that's kind of how we operate. Is you can't really take up residence in a week in somebody's house. And I don't know many agencies where I've worked that in Kansas, and again, it's different states could have different laws, but here locally, that's not been a problem. If they're gone for a year maybe, and somebody was to come in and establish some type of residence, maybe then we'd have to look at something, but no, it's definitely not been a problem for us. Any other questions?
I just had one, and maybe it's a silly question, but when you do get once in a while, I get those pop-up things like, okay, call Apple or whatever, because we noticed a virus on your computer. Is it enough to just delete those or trash them? Because I always think now, does somebody have access? So is just putting that in my junk folder enough?
Are you talking about emails or
Emails or sometimes I'll get like a pop-up on my
like a
phone.
pop-up? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, as long as you don't click on any of the links, or if you don't go and visit any of the sites that they give you, it's generally safe to trash them and just. We get a lot, being a municipal government agency, we're targeted with phishing attacks daily, where we get emails where they're trying to get us to click thinking it's an invoice or something. And I click the report as phishing, and then it goes away to whatever the IT gods have set up. I don't know where it disappears, but it goes somewhere. And hopefully they're put on some kind of filter or blacklist. That's, those guys are way smarter than me. And if I could do that, I'd be making a lot more money if I could figure that out. But no, that's how I handle it. I've shut mine out. And if you're getting a lot of them, and say you might think you might have malware on your computer, I would take it to a reputable place like Geek Squad or somewhere like that to have your computer looked at by somebody that knows what they're doing with that.
And the other thing I was going to say, which was new for me, because I worked over at KU for a long time, so we had regular updates on phishing emails and all of that protocol that we were supposed to do. So I was pretty aware, and then this just happened at our house, 2 months ago, Dave? I had pre-purchased an item directly with the vendor, and I knew them. They live in Potawatomi County. And it was a cemetery headstone for me, to be morbid about it. And then, so I paid them half, and now I'm just gonna pay them half when it was installed, which it was. So that was all a good deal, very good deal. The funeral home sent me a letter with a picture of the monument, so that was all very legit. And I noticed something wasn't quite right. So I sent an email asking if this would be fixed. And I got an email back from the person I knew at the funeral home saying, yes, it would be fixed. And then I replied and said, okay, then, I'll go ahead. I know them, I trust them, then I'll put the payment in the mail for the rest. I immediately got a reply, or not immediately, the next day I got a reply to that said, hey, Susan, can you please wire this money and not send a check? And I mean, it had me hook, line, and sinker, because they're replying in an email chain that I initiated directly to me. And we went back and forth 2 or 3 times, and then I thought something just wasn't right about it. So David suggested I call the funeral home, and of course they still accept checks. So that whole second part was a scam, but it really took me off guard because they were replying to me.
Yeah, they do have malware that these fraudsters somehow get on either your computer or the vendor that you were doing business with, and then they will target you. We did have a business here in Gardner. It's been probably 6 years ago. Similar situation. Somebody was invoicing, I think it was for sprinkler work, and the business was just paying it, thinking it was their normal vendor and that the money was going. And then the normal vendor said, hey, you haven't paid us for a long time. And they tracked it back, and sure enough, it was malware. And we were never able to, by the time it had been reported, it was gone. So,
Well, I felt lucky to figure it out because it was so.
yeah.
so-
Well, these fraudsters are so smart when it comes to the technology and the confident, the different psychologies, if you will, I guess, on how to go at people. But, where they're at with technology is incredible, and it is so hard to tell, That's why if you're in doubt at all, call us. We'll come out and try to help you navigate through it and, call people back. I've done that several times. I get phishing things from my bank. Every once in a while, I'll get something that pops up. I'll call my bank. No, we didn't send that. Okay. And so just always verify, take it upon yourself to call the number and the people and do business with to verify before you click any links or do anything like that.
So there, and there's no, is that something I should be doing with you, just to let you know that happened to me, even though my vendor was in Potawatomi County and he's perfectly a legitimate vendor. And do they monitor, like, if somebody's a scammer like that, will they be monitoring that other person's computer or whoever they've taken control of? Will they be monitoring that in real time?
They can.
That's creepy.
Yes. Any other questions? Well, thank everyone for coming out tonight. And if anybody's watching out there, we thank everybody for tuning in. Have a good night. Be safe. And like I said, call us if you have any doubts at all.
Thank you so much.
Yep.